These are the stories making the headlines at this hour. President Yoon Suk-yeol departs for the Netherlands to forge a semiconductor alliance. He's set to hold talks with Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Wednesday, where deals are also expected on green energy and cultural exchanges. We hear what the Dutch ambassador has to say about the prospects. South Korea will launch a pan-government committee aimed at stabilizing supply chains of key materials affecting the country's economic security. The move comes amid rising concerns over urea supply prices due to China's export restrictions, which the finance minister says is unlikely. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has urged Hamas to surrender now, saying it is facing the beginning of its end. Hamas has warned of no return of hostages without negotiations. Good afternoon. President Yoon Suk-yeol departs for his last overseas trip of the year to the Netherlands to forge a semiconductor alliance. Ahead of the 5-day trip, our Oh Soo-young sat down with the Dutch ambassador for a preview.
Shared values will be at the core of South Korea and the Netherlands' evolving bilateral ties as they cooperate to build resilience against common global challenges. That's according to Peter van der Vliet, the Dutch ambassador to South Korea, ahead of President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the Netherlands this week. The two countries upgraded their ties to a strategic partnership last year, amid geopolitical and economic tensions in the Indo-Pacific region, where 60% of the world's maritime trade passes through.
We are both top 20 open and high-tech economies that share important values, maintaining a rules-based international order, freedom of navigation, democracy, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. And these are not just nice-to-have values, they are, in fact, indispensable for our security and our well-being. So during President Yoon's state visit to the Netherlands, we will extend and broaden our relationship further, also into the political and into the security domain. For instance, by strengthening our bilateral defense cooperation and by working more closely together on issues of economic security and resilience.
As microchips are considered the lifeblood of core technologies that enable both economic and military prowess, Yoon told AFP in an interview published Sunday that Seoul plans to significantly boost semiconductor cooperation with major countries like the Netherlands, the United States and Japan. Not only would Yoon's visit enable stronger cooperation between world-leading chip equipment maker ASML and chip producers Samsung and SK Hynix, but Van der Vliet says it would also foster links for broader innovation.
ASML is part of a larger Dutch semiconductor ecosystem with interests in Korea. And other Dutch equipment companies like ASM, which makes deposition equipment, and Besi, which makes packaging equipment, are also present in Korea. And the Netherlands is also providing chips for Korean electronics and automakers. So the Dutch semiconductor ecosystem also allows for many startups and small and medium-sized enterprises and knowledge institutes working on innovation and development of the semiconductor industry.
The two sides have also been holding exchanges in other areas crucial to economic security like batteries, hydrogen, smart agriculture and defence technology, according to the ambassador. Amid concerns of technology being misused and undermining societies, he further underscored the two democracies' shared interest in not only leading innovation, but also establishing multilateral dialogue and norms to address ethical, legal and security concerns, especially in the military domain.
For example, how can we ensure that artificial intelligence distinguishes between civilians and combatants? How does an AI program come to its conclusions? And for example, when targeting, and who is accountable for military decisions. And that is also why we hosted the first big international conference on this issue called reaffirm 2023, together with Korea. And that is why we are also very glad that the next summit, reaffirm 2024, will be here in Korea.
Going forward, the ambassador placed strategic importance on greater cultural exchanges in areas like film and visual arts.
South Koreans and the Dutch share a close affinity rooted in the in the essence of their small yet dynamic nations, and both countries heavily rely on human resources and a shared commitment to finding very innovative and creative solutions to all kinds of challenges. And Koreans and the Dutch are both, I think they're very creative people, and creative people find each other.
Following Yoon's bilateral talks with Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Wednesday, the two will sign deals on key areas of cooperation likely to include semiconductors, green energy and people-to-people exchanges. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
Over the weekend, South Korea and the U.S. held their first dialogue on technology cooperation. The top security advisors of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan also met in Seoul to reaffirm their commitments to countering North Korea, all to follow up to recent agreements between the leaders of the three countries. Kim Do-yeon reports.
As South Korea and the U.S. try to upgrade their technology cooperation and modernize the ROK-US alliance into a more comprehensive one, the first next-generation critical and emerging technologies dialogue was held in Seoul on Saturday. It was chaired by the two countries' national security advisors, Cho Tae-yong and Jake Sullivan. This is a follow-up to President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the U.S. back in April.
At this meeting, the two countries discussed comprehensive cooperation measures in the semiconductors, quantum, bio batteries, and clean energy, and AI and digital fields. They also agreed to hold an informal tripartite dialogue between South Korea, the U.S., and India early next year.
Specifically, some agreements include exploring cooperative opportunities between their semiconductor technology centers and supporting joint research projects between South Korea's Ministry of Science and ICT and the U.S. National Science Foundation. Additionally, they committed to investing at least $10 million in collaborative research in the biosector. In the meantime, on the same day, 4 months after the trilateral summit at Camp David between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, Cho hosted Sullivan and Japan's Takeo Akiba to touch base on the spirit and principles of Camp David. Since the summit, North Korea has successfully launched a reconnaissance satellite into orbit, a key discussion topic between the three.
We reaffirmed North Korea's obligations to denuclearize and the prohibition of military cooperation under the UN Security Council resolutions on the North Korean issue. We also agreed to strengthen coordination among the three countries to ensure the thorough implementation of these obligations by the international community.
First and foremost, we've implemented our new commitment to consult with one another in response to regional threats, and we're increasing our trilateral defense cooperation, including sharing missile warning data in real time.
They also reaffirmed the importance of a resilient supply chain and economic security while addressing ongoing issues such as the war in Ukraine and issues in the Taiwan Strait. Cho and Akiba also used strong words to address the topic of fake news.
This was recognized as a challenge and threat to the fundamental matters of operating fair election processes in democratic countries and preserving the foundation of a free and democratic society.
In the meantime, to welcome the two advisors, President Yoon hosted them both at his residence for dinner. While showing gratitude, Sullivan said he visited Seoul while in college and had bulgogi, but could have never imagined having bulgogi with the South Korean president decades later. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea will launch a pan-government committee aimed at stabilizing supply chains of key materials affecting the country's economic security. The move comes amid rising concerns over a urea supply crisis due to China's export restrictions, which the finance minister says is unlikely. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korea is enhancing its supply chain management in response to rising concerns about its reliance on imports of certain raw materials. Finance Minister Chu Kyung held a meeting on Monday with related ministers where they discussed how to mitigate current and future supply chain risks.
Risks in the supply of items directly related to core industries and people's lives, such as urea, ammonium phosphate, and graphite, have recently been growing.
The government plans to establish a pan-governmental supply chain management committee by June next year that will oversee the creation and revisions to supply chain policies. During the second half of next year, the committee will also decide which raw materials and other economic items should be designated as essential economic goods. And the businesses that supply and produce these goods will receive government support for production and stock management. The government also plans to establish a supply chain stabilization fund with the Export-Import Bank of Korea sometime next year to provide financial support such as loans and investment for these businesses, with the size of the fund to be decided in the first half of next year. But the minister emphasized that a repeat of the urea shortage crisis in 2021 is unlikely.
Urea sales at gas stations were higher than usual immediately after the imports from China were halted, but the increase has been slowing since last week, and prices have largely been stable.
Prices of urea solution at gas stations on Thursday last week were around 1,602 won, or $1.20 per liter. That's within the regular national average price range of around $1 to $1.40. And around 96% of gas stations nationwide were confirmed to have supplies of urea solution. The government also announced that it has secured more than 4 months of urea, up from its previous 3-month supply thanks to recent contracts signed with countries other than China. 이수진, Arirang News.
COP28 is nearing its end amid lingering clashes over the phased withdrawal of fossil fuel use. The proposed adaptation goals have met with opposition from some of the world's biggest carbon emitters, including Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China. 신세벽 reports.
At this year's annual UN Climate Summit, COP28, the crux of negotiations is the phased withdrawal of fossil fuel use. The conference is set to end on December 12th, but countries are clashing over the draft of adaptation goals. Some 80 countries have been able to reach consensus on the phasing out of all carbon-emitting fossil fuels. And the UAE, playing host this year, is rolling up its sleeves with high-ranking officials from attending countries to draw up an agreement.
It is our opportunity to deliver an outcome that is based on the science, led by the science, and equipped by the science.
This, however, is facing strong opposition, led by some of the world's biggest carbon emitters, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China. These countries claim that the conference should only focus on reducing climate pollution, not the fossil fuels causing it. OPEC also openly opposed the formalization of a phased withdrawal and reduction of fossil fuels and emphasized the need for a realistic approach to solving the climate crisis.
There is no single solution or path to achieve a sustainable energy future. We need realistic approaches to tackle emission.
This has prompted wide criticism of OPEC and oil companies, among those advocating for the cutting of carbon emissions by reducing carbon fuels.
OPEC and the oil companies right now are trying to whitewash the crisis that has been created by fossil fuels.
The International Energy Agency, in its report released on Sunday, said new pledges to be made at the climate summit are indeed positive, but will not be enough. The IEA said the world is still off track to meet climate targets to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, despite pledges made by dozens of countries. Climate activists symbolically releasing fluorescent substances into the Grand Canal in Venice, Italy, called for action on climate change. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan will host next year's event, COP29, on the back of support from Eastern European nations from November 11th to 22nd. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has urged Hamas to surrender now, saying it's facing the beginning of its end. Hamas has warned of no return of hostages without negotiations. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday called on Hamas to lay down their weapons and surrender, saying the Palestinian militant group's end is near. In the statement, Netanyahu said dozens of Hamas militants have surrendered over the past few days. However, Hamas has rejected the claims. Meanwhile, the Palestinian militant group says Israel will not be able to recover any of its hostages unless it engages in talks over conditional swap deals. A spokesperson for the Al-Qassam brigades said in a statement broadcast by Al Jazeera's television on Sunday that Israel will not be able to recover the captives by force, adding there had been a failed attempt by the Israeli military to free one of them. He also noted that Hamas fighters had partially or fully destroyed 180 Israeli personnel carriers, tanks, and bulldozers in the 10 days since fighting began after a brief 7-day ceasefire. The Israeli Prime Minister and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke over the phone for nearly an hour on Sunday, with the Israeli leader reportedly expressing dissatisfaction with Moscow's stance in the armed conflict. Russia has regularly criticized Israel, including at the UN Security Council, while also hosting a Hamas delegation in late October for meetings. According to Russia's TASS news agency, Putin told Netanyahu that Moscow rejects terrorism but cannot support the dire situation of people in Gaza. Meanwhile, speaking to CNN, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it's up to Israel and not the U.S. to decide when to end its war against Hamas in Gaza. The comments come as reports of Washington pressing on Israel to wrap up operations by the end of the year. In a show of support, Blinken defended the emergency sales of nearly 14,000 rounds of tank ammunition to Israel and called for a quick approval from Congress for more than $100 billion in aid for Israel, Ukraine, and other national security priorities. 이승재, Arirang News.
K-pop boy group ATEEZ have topped the Billboard 200 chart for the first time with their newly released second album. According to Billboard on Sunday, the album The World Episode Final Will has sold over 150,000 equivalent album units, mostly through traditional album sales. The success sets a marker for smaller K-pop agencies in Korea, with the band's representative KQ Entertainment becoming the first such company outside the so-called Big Four firms to have a #1 album on the Billboard 200. The Billboard 200 chart ranks the most popular albums of the week in the United States, based on multi-metric consumption measured in equivalent album units. 4 more members of BTS are set to begin their mandatory military service this week. RM and V are scheduled to join the army on Monday. Jimin and Jungkook will follow them the next day. The 4 members are expected to be discharged from the service in June 2025. Currently, the 3 other members of the group, Jin, J-Hope, and Suga, are serving in the military. In South Korea, all able-bodied men are required to serve in the military for at least 18 months. In the English Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur beat Newcastle United 4-1 on Sunday with the help of South Korea's Heung-min. Son turned provider for Italian teammate Destiny Udogie and Brazil Richarlison on 26 and 38 minutes before scoring from the penalty spot late in the second half. That goal was his 10th in the league this season, meaning the Tottenham captain has scored double-digit league goals in each of the past 8 seasons.
Let's take a look at the latest news on the world now. In the U.S., tornadoes and strong thunderstorms across the state of Tennessee on Saturday has left at least 6 dead, dozens injured, while causing major infrastructural damages and power outages. Tennessee's capital, Nashville, suffered 3 deaths, while the city of Clarksville also saw 3 deaths, including a child. Clarksville Mayor Joe Pitts said on Sunday that 62 people have been hospitalized and hundreds of buildings had been made uninhabitable. The city declared a state of emergency, including a 9 p.m. curfew, which will remain until Sunday. As of Sunday afternoon, there were reportedly more than 50,000 people without power across the state. Tennessee officials' preliminary report stated that 13 tornadoes struck the state on Saturday. The Sudanese Health Ministry and the WHO have reported a surge in cases of cholera in the country. There have been at least 5,200 suspected cases so far and at least 160 related deaths. Sudan's cholera outbreak started at the end of September in the state of Gedaref and has spread to 9 states as of the end of November. The civil war between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces is adding to the difficulty preventing cholera. Local authorities say the lack of access to clean water and medical facilities has exacerbated the spread of the disease, which spreads through contaminated food and water. The WHO has started to support cholera treatment centers by providing medical supplies and covering operational costs, while the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has said that nearly 2.2 million oral cholera vaccines have been administered. Imprisoned Nobel Peace Prize winner Narges Mohammadi had her prize accepted on her behalf on Sunday by her twin children at a ceremony in Norway's capital, Oslo. Mohammadi, an acclaimed Iranian activist, won this year's Peace Prize for her work fighting against the oppression of women and democracy. In a statement read by her 17-year-old children in Oslo, she said the Iranian people, with perseverance, will overcome repression and authoritarianism, and to have no doubt this is certain. The 51-year-old Mohammadi is currently serving a 10-year jail sentence in Tehran for spreading propaganda. She has been a prominent human rights figure in Iran for years and has been almost imprisoned continuously since 2010. Her husband, who is also a political activist, lives in Paris in exile with their 2 children. Japanese baseball sensation Shohei Otani has signed a record-breaking $700 million 10-year contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers. This is the biggest contract in team sports history and makes the U.S. Major League Baseball star one of the world's highest-earning athletes. The 29-year-old has twice been named American League MVP and is seen as one of the best baseball players in history. The Dodgers beat off fierce competition after Ohtani opted to leave his previous team, the Los Angeles Angels, upon expiration of his 6-year contract. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. After the jacket-free weekend we had, we are having a rainy start to mid-December. It's forecasted to rain all day nationwide and quite heavily for winter rain. East of Gangwon-do and mountainous regions in Jeju could see downpours into tomorrow morning, and rain could turn to snow in some of the areas. Meanwhile, the rest of the country will also receive rainstorms into tomorrow morning. Imagine if it was snow falling instead of those showers. That could have been a real headache. Temperatures will continue to be abnormally warm this week. We had a balmy start to the day, but highs are 5 to 7 degrees lower this afternoon in most places, topping out at 10 degrees here in the capital. Busan and Gwangju topping out at 16 degrees. Then another band of rain is in the forecast at the end of the week, and that will bring bone-chilling temperatures to the country this weekend, going down to minus 10 degrees Celsius on Sunday morning in the capital. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Now let's put into perspective Japanese baseball superstar Shohei Otani's record $700 million contract. There are 162 games per year, so Ohtani is making roughly $430,000 per game. Next season, the two-way star will only play as a hitter, not a pitcher, due to injury. Now, given an average 4.5 plate appearances, Ohtani will earn roughly $96,000 each time he steps up to the plate to bat. That is more than the average annual salary in Korea's professional baseball league. And with his entire contract money, you could build 5 new baseball stadiums in Korea. Truly amazing. This is where we end today's newscast. Thanks for watching.